Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemin. And joining me are good friends, Rabbi Barry J. Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island, and Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanofsky of Anshe Chesed in New York City. It is great to see you guys. We want to thank our viewers and listeners for being with us. We honor you. Build this audience. This is such a great audience. We have so much fun with the Parsha Talk, and getting right into Parsha Talk. This is Parsha Tetzaveh. It's also a special Shabbat this week. It's Shabbat Zachor, named Zachor because of the special maftir taken from the book of Deuteronomy at the end of Parshat Tetzaveh, Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek, and because it's also leading up to Purim, which in the year 2023, 5783, comes this Monday night after the day of Tanit Esther, Monday night through Tuesday, in all cities that do not have a wall from the time of Joshua, which would include Highland Park, New Jersey, New York City. What's your town, Barry? What?
I live in Huntington. My school's in Williston Park.
Okay, so to the best of my knowledge, neither of those had a wall from the time of Joshua. So
it depends which Joshua.
Exactly. Okay. Highland Park, you can argue because there's some ancient settlements in New Jersey. I don't know, but maybe New York City. There indigenous peoples. They didn't have walls.
Well, there is Wall Street, but I don't think it's quite that old.
Indeed. Okay. Let's start with Tetzaveh. Let's start with the end of Tetzaveh. The Parsha continues to deal with items for the priesthood, items for the Mishkan. A lot of focus on the clothing of the Kohanim, in intricate detail, sumptuous detail, describing the Kohen's outerwear and underwear. And
underwear also, actually.
What's that?
Underwear also.
Underwear also. His headdress, the turbans and breastplate and shoulder pads.
You should show the picture. You should show that picture.
I should show the picture. Let's see if it can come up on.
This is an actual photograph from the first temple.
Yeah, exactly. Sure it is. Okay, here we go. We are sharing the picture of the Kohen Gadol. And look, yes, this is what Don Cherry is behind him, because Don Cherry was in my class this week. The tzitz is what we're referring to as the forehead plate, the mitznefet, the turban. Choshen Mishpat, the table of all the names, in which you have the Urim V'Tumim, the colored gemstones of the Urim V'Tumim, Ketona Tashbetz, the adorned tunic, the Avnet, his waistband, ephod, his outerwear, apron thing, Michnasayim, Mitachat Levgadim, which are not in here, and the Me'il Techela. And you can see at the bottom, they don't really talk about the bells here, but there are bells. And you want to talk about the bells for a second, Barry? Why does a Kohen wear bells?
Well, that's a good question. The obvious reason is he has to make noise. That's the only reason to wear bells. But what is the noise for? And apparently it's a kind of alarm system. It's to make him realize what he's doing and where he's going, which is actually quite dangerous.
Yeah.
So even though I think I said a few weeks ago when we were talking about the time when we wanted to live, and for me it was the Second Temple period on Yom Kippur, where the Kohen would go in with a little thread or rope tied to him in case, God forbid, something would happen. He could be pulled out without endangering other people who had no right to go in the Kodesh HaKodeshim. The bells seem to symbolize the need of the Kohen to always be conscious of what he's doing. And what I liked about the picture, Elliot, with the breastplate situated as it is, the Kohen himself is a conduit for God communing with the people. It's as if God is going to speak through the Kohen, who's no longer entirely a human being, but a kli or vessel for God's word, that it should come out to the people.
Yeah.
My wife Amy has recently gotten into tap dancing.
Okay.
Really, and she's both been taking classes, and we've watched a lot of tap dance videos. And one of the things which I didn't really appreciate, and actually read a very cool book about this. One of the things I didn't appreciate is that it is a dance. It's also a percussion instrument. like the people who are tap dancing are functioning like drummers. And in the same way drummer can, vary the rhythms and do all kinds of very creative and engaging syncopations, and like the very steps that they make turn their legs, turn their feet into musical instruments. And there may be something going on here too. It is exactly what Barry said, an aid to the Kohen's own kavanah. But you become, can you imagine it, as a Kohen walks by, the high priest is not only this regal creature wearing gemstones, he's also a musical instrument. And it's something perhaps sounds beautiful just as they walk by.
Well, is he trying to let God know that he's coming? I mean, that's one way of explaining it too. I mean, obviously God knows that he's coming, but is he saying, with the little bell sounds, I'm stepping into the zone, God, and I want you to know that I'm here. I want you to know that I'm.
Why would God want to know that he's here?
So it's not that.
Or why would the Kohen want God to know? In other words, what is the impetus for the Kohen to make this signal to God? I mean, what you're suggesting, I think, is a kind of reciprocity. Is that in order for the Kohen to function correctly, not only must God speak through him, but the Kohen has to be able to speak to God, and he has to be able to get God's attention.
Exactly. And I think there might be some of that going on. Look, it's very interesting that the bells and truthfully all of the different implements of the Kohen Gadol are found in the synagogue. I always like to point out to, especially when you teach this to children, that in these parshiot, where the begadim, the clothing of the Kohen Gadol is described, you have some of the remnants of that in the genius way that Judaism tries to transpose the Kohen Gadol to the adornments of the Torah. You have the tzitz, you have the choshen. Many of our Sefer Torah are adorned with these kinds of things, including bells. I don't know, Barry, in your shul, do you have like a crown with a bell, or Jeremy, you haven't?
Yeah, I think that we have a noisy Torah.
A noisy Torah. I have several, and the bells fall off from time to time, and
but think about it for a moment. So in your shul, there's a procession with the Torah.
Exactly.
My shul is a very small room, so it doesn't quite process in the same way. So what is the function of the bells making noise in your shul? What are people actually hearing when the Torah gets marched around?
Whatever they want to hear. No, so here I'll tell you what I hear, which is I'm hearing a reenactment of the Kohen Gadol, and I'm hearing this kind of transposition of biblical adornment to the Torah in a way that Judaism is creative, ironic, paradoxical, but also beautiful.
Sorry. What's interesting, we sometimes speak of the rabbis democratizing Judaism, because now high office, being a rabbi, which used to be a high office, I guess before I inhabited it, is open to anyone, unlike the priesthood or the kingship. But what you're talking about is also a kind of democratization in time, because the Kohen Gadol wears all this stuff on Yom Kippur.
Correct.
Well,
in order to
wait a second. Actually, this is quite right. The Kohen Gadol wears the Bigdei Lavan when doesn't have all this stuff when doing the specific Yom Kippur stuff. Isn't that correct?
I'm not sure, but
changes garments.
He's not going to be sacrificing animals with all those clothes on.
No, the Kohen Gadol,
they'd be covered with blood. When the first one.
Well, this is the bloodiness of it is obviously a
right. So the point I want to make, though, is that with the bells on the Torah, if we're comparing that to the Kohen Gadol entering the Holy of Holies, well, we do that regularly throughout the year, right? Every Shabbat, we hear in Rishul Elliot the sounds of the bells, and that's supposed to remind us of our own access to God. Right, that's what I thought I heard you say.
I think, and here we'd have to kind of do a little research to clarify. The Kohen Gadol is wearing these clothes whenever he is in the holy areas. Okay, he's not going into the holy holies until only except on Yom Kippur, but he's certainly around the Mizbeach. He's certainly lighting the menorah. He's certainly with the shulchan. He's certainly with the ketoret at different times, and so he's not wearing the B uniform. He's always wearing the A uniform, and then when he has to leave the precincts of the holy area, he has to take them off. That's what the avoda service is all about. He has to change his clothes. He immerses. He changes his clothes again, and I'm thinking of it as it's reflected in the Yishai Ribo song on that, which is a lovely, lovely song. Okay, so we have.
But I just want to say real quick, on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol wears the regular stuff, the Bigdei Zahav, all the stuff we're reading today. For all the other stuff, the specific avodot, the specific sacrificial worship things, the pulchan, the rite of the Yom Kippur, the Seir HaMishtalech, the scapegoat, the purifying the Beit Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Holy of Holies, those things I'm pretty sure are done in the white garments that don't have the bells and don't have the other stuff. Because of course he couldn't, the gold is what makes Lichavod Tifaret, as our Parsha says today, won't work on Yom Kippur, in which they can't wear the gold because it'll remind God of the golden calf.
Yeah.
So I think that the particular bell part of the garment is general and not Yom Kippur specific. I could be wrong about that because let's all admit that this is not this is one of those things that's just in the mystery of the descriptions. I never quite grasp exactly what's going on.
They have this, they all of these things, including the things that we talked about last week, they live in our imaginations more than they do in of course reality. They are all symbols of things that are trying to express the inexpressible, which is what is evoked at the end of the parsha, where it says in chapter 29 verse 43, "Ve'no'adati shama livnei Yisrael v'nikdash bikvodi." I will make myself known to you. I'll meet you there, meet the people, the children of Israel there, v'nikdash bikvodi, and will be sanctified with my glory, my honor, my presence. V'kidashti et oel moed ve'et hamizbech. I will sanctify the tent of meeting and the altar and Aaron, etc. V'shachanti b'toch b'nei Yisrael. I will dwell in the midst of Israel. Vayiti lahem l'Elohim, and I will be their God. V'yadu ki ani Adonai Elohem, and they will know that I am the Lord their God. Asher hotzeti otam eretz Yisrael, who took you out of Egypt. I almost like want to dam for day here, l'shachni b'tocham, to dwell amongst them. Ani Adonai Elohim. So what's the purpose? The purpose of all this, again, in the coda here of this passage, is that he's going to meet there, and this obviously raises the question. How do you meet God? Barry.
Probably with a Hallmark greeting card. But what's comes through in your description now is that the Ohel Moed is about sacred space, sacred place, but its effect is to do something with our sense of time, because God is not meeting us in the place, he's meeting in us. He's going to dwell within us. And that's going to happen at some moment or some extended period, perhaps, of time, because there's this tension in Judaism, I think, between time and space. Wonderfully captured by the late Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, where he described Shabbat as a palace in time, also trying to bridge the physical and the temporal world in some symbol. And I think, we're getting ready, in addition to Purim, for the golden calf next week, which is the great symbol of God in an idolatrous way. And the passage here seems to remind us that we don't look for God in a place or in the space, but we look within our heart. And we all know we can't really do that. We're not heart surgeons. But it's supposed to speak to us in a similar way, that, going back to when you had the description of the Aron in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, with that little dot of space, which is supposed to represent God, in the Holy of Holies, as well as the great universe beyond, which represents the infinity of God.
May I ask a question? I mean, and I'll pose this to Jeremy. You know, more mystically inclined than I'll admit me. Okay, so could these function then as some kind of meditative, Kabbalistic, you know, does one, have you encountered in any of your reading or study of the Kabbalah a kind of meditation on the Mishkan? Do you ever, you know, is there a person, you know, because I was experimenting with this last week, you know, and thinking about the Aron HaKodesh, and say, okay, so imagine, you know, you did a meditative exercise and you close your eyes and you try and get that infinitesimal light source from above the Kruvim. And I'm thinking, like, that's interesting, that's fun, you know, but I mean, this is all we're doing, where we're trying to imagine these things, you know, in our mind. No.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm not grasping right now. I'm sure that we could find the mystical language to approach that. But I would just say it as follows. Moshe, and this is going to be next week's Parsha, when he goes in the sacred place and meets God, he takes away the veil and begins to glow. He's had an experience that makes him glow. And when he comes back out in the world, he puts on a veil. It's only mentioned, you know, here in Parshat Ki Tisa, but it's such a resonant image that I think in Jewish like lore, we think about it a lot. Moses has had experiences of God which leave him luminous. In fact, leave him so luminous that he can't really relate to everybody in the normal face-to-face human encounter way. So I think that the thought that you could meet God, again, like obviously the way we have it is that being in the presence of the Kruvim, the throne to the invisible God, the box holding the broken stones, you know, it's not something that every Israelite would ever have experienced. But the idea, I think, is that you can have such face-to-face encounters that leave you totally changed. And I also resonate, now not in a, these are kind of mystically inflected, but they're not the mystical tradition, the conventional rabbinic tradition, midrashic maneuvers that treat every part of the Mishkan as part of the human body. You know, like there's the menorah, and that's like the eyes because it's luminous, and then the planks are like the bones, and you know, this midrashim that goes through each techeret is this, and argaman is this, and tolat shani, the colors, the different color threads are this, that, and the other thing. Gold is this, and silver is that, and copper is the third thing. And they try to turn the human body into the Mishkan becomes a symbol for the human who is the sacred space themselves, him or herself or themselves. And the wearing of the sacred garments, I think, is a similar sort of thing. If you were the Kohen Gadol and you have the names of the tribes of Israel inscribed on your chest and on your and on your shoulders, and on the band on your forehead says "Holy to the Lord," you are going to say, "Aha! I am turned into a living vessel." And I think that's a profound, like, meditative technique. If you just thought of yourself, like one of my own small meditations, our many listeners have certainly seen the Harry Potter movies, and you know, there's this thing called the Marauder's Map. If the wrong person looks at it, it's just a blank piece of parchment, but with the right spell, the whole map of Hogwarts appears on it, and the words appear on it. And I like to imagine, as I'm saying the Shema, wearing tefillin, they're like the words are appearing on my body. The Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad is like emerging out of me like the Marauder's Map. You become something sacred. You become a sacred being, a sacred personality. So I think this has got a lot of meditative potential.
So just out of curiosity, Jeremy, do you associate that feeling with a sense of luminosity?
Well, with the specific meditation about the tefillin, I think of it as becoming like like a cloth, like this parchment of the Torah. But But yeah, I mean, I think the story of Moshe coming down the mountain and glowing and not even knowing that he's glowing, I think is a kind of luminous feeling.
So I would offer a slightly different take on Moses coming down, that the luminousness that he experiences is on the inside, but what the people experience of it is disfigurement, right? There's something that they can no longer look at, not necessarily in a positive way, but in a negative way, because his experience is so profound and it's so unavailable to them.
Fascinating. Okay, we're gonna just gonna pause here and change gears completely because we have Purim coming up, and we don't have a lot of time, but we gotta do our annual random Purim text generating verse generator. Okay, and I happen to have one of those dice programs.
Urim and Tumim,
Urim and
perhaps.
Turim. Here we go. This is the dice. Okay, and we're gonna roll the dice. And we're gonna let's go chapter 2, verse 5. Chapter 2,
Wait a
verse 5.
second, that is so cool. That verse thing, the dice thing. Where do you just find it?
I
Like
call it
virtual
some
dice?
teaching tools, whatever it's called. I don't know. Chapter 2, verse 5. Here we go.
I
And I
can't
happen
find
to
it
turn
here.
to the wrong Megillah, Kohelet. Chapter 2, verse 5 in the book of Esther. It says as follows.
That was
Oh
a
my
great
God,
one.
look at that. Look at that. Ish Yehudi Hayav Shoshana Bira Ushmo Mordechai Ben Yair Ben Shimi Ben Kish Ish Yemini. There was a Jew. In the Golah, Shiragota, Yinichava, Melech Yehuda. Okay, Barry, you got 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Give me your best vort on Ishu Hudi Ayab Shoshana Bira off the spot. This is
So the genealogy is striking because Kish is the father of Saul, if I remember correctly, and from the tribe of Benjamin. And so Mordechai is identified with the smallest of the tribes,
yeah.
but a proud Judahite, as it were, which is the largest of the tribes. So he spans the smallest to the largest and is going to become the representative of the southern kingdom, which comprised the two tribes, Judah and Benjamin, along
Okay.
with the Kohanim, of course.
I'm going to give a shot on this, okay? Which is that isn't it interesting the way the verse is divided into like two kind of sections? Ishu Udiyayab Shoshana Bira, and then the name and the genealogy, as you mentioned. And so here we're getting his the space, the place that defines him, and that he is a Jew within this kind of non-Jewish Gentile territory, Shoshana Birau, however you imagine the capital. And so that already gives us the literary tension of the book, that here's a Jew in the Gentile capital, and what does that mean? And now you've given me his identity, Ushmo Mordechai. He has a name, he has a genealogy. Okay, all right. Generate another one, or Jeremy, want a little comment on that?
You go. Give me a new dice.
A new one. Here we go. Share the screen. Here we go. We're gonna dial up another verse. You're gonna get chapter 4, verse 2. Chapter 4, verse 2.
You realize, by the way you got it set up, we can only get the first 6 verses.
I know.
You shouldn't spread don't tell our listeners that.
Chapter 4, verse 2. Oh my God, this is such a great one. Okay. What does it say? Vayavo ad lifnei shara melech ki ein lavo el shara melech bilvush sak. Mordechai went up to the gates of the king, because you can't go to the gates of the king in wearing sackcloth. What is going on?
We got to go 1 and 2. So Mordechai learns all that. Mordechai learns that there's this decree been placed upon the Jewish people. And he tears his garments and he puts on sackcloth, the symbol of mourning, and dust on his forehead. And he goes out in the course of the city and cries out a very bitter cry. And he reaches to the gate of the king, but you can't enter the king if you can't enter the gate of the king if you're wearing sackcloth. There's so much to say about this. First of all, there's a great midrashic tradition. Esav, when Jacob steals the birthright from Esav and steals the blessing, Esav cries out, Mara, a very, very bitter wailing cry. And the rabbis say, don't think God ever forgets anything, because this is going to be recompensed when some Jew, some descendant of Jacob has to cry a bitter cry, and it's this one. So there's a kind of a, you know, karmic quality to this, and you can't come to the king's house in mourning. Now, maybe this is mockery of Ahasuerus. There's wickedness in the world, but behind the gates of the palace, there's only happiness. There's only fancy clothes. There's only joy. But right outside the gate of the king, right outside the gate of the king, there is only bitterness and sorrow and mourning. And so I think broadly speaking, my subversive reading of the book of Esther is that King Ahasuerus is a kind of a satire on the king who should be running things better in the kingdom, the big one, and you only joy in God's realm, but you know what? Down in the world, there's lots of pain.
I react to Vayikra. That's in chapter the verse 1, the first 4:1. Vayikra Mordechai at Begadav, the tearing. Of course, that we have that in the Kriya ritual. Mourners do it. Mourners do it today on their clothes, on their shirts, and sometimes, obviously on a ribbon. Also, we do that with members of our shul who are uncomfortable. But this is not on death, though. This is on learning of terrible things, and I mean, we would be remiss like that. We didn't want to really get into it, but terrible. There was a terrible event this past week in Israel, of course, with the murder of the two boys, and then the murder of an American Israeli in the northern Dead Sea area, and of course the terrible burning of Chawar. And reading about that, you read that Jews perpetrated this event in this Arab town, and there is a kind of instinctive reaction of wanting to rend your garments in some way. This is the brokenness. There's a brokenness in feeling that the world is coming apart, and that's what Kriya is all about. That somehow outside things are not what they need to be, and we have no other way of expressing that. And I didn't want to take that too serious, in that area. But how can we not? I guess. Should we generate another verse?
Can you make dice that have more than 6 sides?
Well, we'll do it twice. Okay, so add the left one. That's 4, 5, and we'll add. That'll be 10, 2. So 10, 7. We don't even go to 10, 7. We have to do this again. Okay, so we got 1, 2 plus.
Let's make that chapter 3, verse 6.
There you go. Chapter 3, verse 6.
What do we got? Oh yeah. Okay, and I'll go to 5. When Haman saw that Mordechai would not kneel or bow low, he was filled with rage, but he disdained to lay hands on Mordechai alone, having been told who Mordechai's people were. Haman plotted to do away with all the Jews throughout the kingdom of Ahasuerus.
Yeah. Talk about it. Vayivez be'enav lishloach yad b'Mordechai levado.
Haman was Vayivez be'enav, maybe another Esav reference, by the way. Vayivez Esav et habechorah. Esav despised the birthright. Haman in this scene is seen to be so ambitiously wicked that he doesn't want to kill his enemy. He wants to kill his enemy's whole family. And I do think that, by the way, the long history of Am Yisrael and its enemies, this kind of works, right? Like, nobody's ever against a Jew. They're against the Jewish people, right? And our identity as individuals sometimes gets, like, in the eyes of those who hate Jews, they just associate, you are one member of this entire wicked thing, and I hate them all, and I want to strike at all the Jews. I think that is kind of a feature of what it is to be a victim of anti-Semitism.
Absolutely.
So what I would add is that Haman personalizes everything, right? Mordechai's action is not directed towards Haman so much as it is an affirmation of God. And I've had occasion to mention a teacher I had at Spertus College of Judaica, Rabbi Martin Goldman, who said the problem is not anthropomorphism, talking about God in human terms. It's rather people thinking they're God. And we have an element of this in Haman, who thinks of himself as God. That's why he wants people to bow down to him. And Mordecai, of course, bows down in our tradition to the one true God, and not to Haman, who's
So let me ask you on that note. We often say about the Book of Esther that God is not present in the Book of Esther. One cynical colleague of ours said because he would be embarrassed to be in there. But are there divine elements? Are there God elements in? Would you say? I mean, this is a theological point that you made, Barry, which is that he doesn't bow down to him because he only, the hidden truth there is he only bows down to God, to the one God. Is there theology in the Book of Esther?
Well, I think we could understand it in one of two ways. We could say that this is how God acts in the Galut, in the diaspora, because you have to remember at all times that the story of Esther takes place in Persia.
Yeah.
But also, it's a modern situation as well, that after the destruction of the temple, God is not at our beck and call. But he's not completely divorced from the world that we live in. And so we look for signs of God's presence, rather some indirection, perhaps we could say, rather than a direct presence.
Well, let me just say one. Well, just make a comment on that point. I would say that there, of course, there's the famous verse that Mordecai says to Esther, come through here, and if you don't, maybe this is why you have attained this position, and if you don't stand up, then rescue will come to the Jews from some other place, and those things are read as God's pulling the strings behind the scenes. I don't. There's probably somewhat to that's true, but what I would say is there's not theology in the Book of Esther. What there is religiosity. That is to say, not the story about God, but the story about how faithful human beings respond to all the difficult things in their lives. So Mordecai, God doesn't show up for Mordecai, and Mordecai's devoted. Mordecai is resistant of idolatry, resistant of assimilation, and he's going to hang in there. And Esther is brave because she has to come through, and she comes through on behalf of Am Yisrael. And those things, they may not be theological in the sense that God isn't saying, acting, doing, teaching, but they are religious in that they are human responses to wanting to keep faith.
So I would just add that your cynical colleague would read me Makom Acher from another God. That if Esther doesn't do it, then help will come from another God to replace our God.
And I would, there's plenty of politics. Let's do one more. Let's do one more verse here, the time allowing. Are we going to roll again? Here we go. We got 5:1. Should I do it again?
Let's call it chapter 6, verse.
No, 5:1, 6. No, we don't have chapter. I'm going to start again. Okay, so
you had 5 plus 1. That's chapter 6, and verse 6 4 is verse 10.
Perfect. Okay, chapter 6, verse 10. And share here. Stop share. Go ahead.
Chapter 6. Yeah, nice one. Chapter 6. Achashverosh can't sleep, and he's out of Ambien. And so he asks for a history book, which is very funny. I'll read the history book. That'll help me fall asleep. And he knows that Mordecai has done him a great favor. He exposed the traitors Bigtan and Teresh. And he realizes that he's never been rewarded, that the king has never been rewarded. And the king has never rewarded this loyal Mordecai. So he says, we got to do something about that. And then he says, okay, somebody advise me on what we should do for somebody the king wants to honor. And Haman, he said, who's standing in the hallway? And it's Haman. He says, come on, bring in Haman. And Haman, what do we do? If I, King Ahasuerus, really wanted to honor somebody, what should I do? And Haman's thinking, baby, this is me. He wants to honor me. So you'd let him ride on the royal horse and wear the royal garment and wear the royal crown and all these wonderful things that I would love. And Ahasuerus says, that is a great idea. Get Mordecai and do exactly that. So verse 10, quick then, the king says to Haman, get the garb and the horse, as you said, and do this too. Mordecai the Jew, who sits in the king's gate. Leave out nothing of all you propose. So Haman, who thought he was going to ride the horse, takes the garb and the horse, and he arrays Mordecai, and he parades him through the city square, and he proclaims before him exactly what Haman had always wanted to say. This is what you do for the king, for the man whom the king wants to honor.
Isn't it amazing, that the Parsha deals with clothing, and that this little verse here deals with clothing also, and that putting the royal garments on on Mordechai is a way of elevating him, and that's what clothing does to us. There's that Sid Caesar, the show of shows, or what is a beautiful Mel Brooks skit where they're dressing the doorman, and you'll watch it. He's putting the epaulets on, and he's putting the buttons on, and he's looking like a German general basically, and he goes out and he's a doorman, and the idea of the uniform, the royal garments, taking you from your regular state and making you special. We don't have that. I mean, I do feel special when I wear a suit, especially a new suit. If you ever get a chance to wear a new suit, Jeremy, your son's getting married in a couple of weeks. You got a new suit?
I got a rental tuxedo.
All right.
He and Didi bought the tuxedo, or somebody bought him a tuxedo. More expensive than any suit I ever bought for myself, let me tell you.
But there's something when you put on a garment, especially a nice one. It's one of the great joys of life. And so is this. So is studying the Torah together, the three of us, as we've been doing now for 3 years. We're on the 3rd year anniversary here. I think Shkalim was our
triennial cycle.
Unbelievable. 3 years. And many of our viewers and listeners have been with us from day one, including like my mother and including other people. And we are so, so thankful that you have been with us. We will celebrate the 3rd year Parsha Talk anniversary with you. In addition to that, we're celebrating Purim. Happy Purim, everyone. Pray for
everybody. You should do. You should be sure on Purim. You got to give matanot le'evyonim.
Absolutely.
Give gifts to the poor. Mishloach manot ish l're'ehu, and send your friends cookies.
Amen. Amen. Have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbat and a beautiful Purim. And we will see you next week on the next edition of Parsha Talk. Everybody, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Thanks, man.